History, as they say, is often written by the victors. But sometimes, a tiny, fragile piece of paper survives to tell the real story. In the quiet, hallowed halls of the Louisiana State Archives, amidst countless ledgers and dusty land deeds, lies a document so anachronistic, so unsettling, that it defies logic. It is a marriage certificate from the year 1858. The names are elegantly written, Jeremiah Aldrich and Celeste. What makes this so shocking isn't just the union itself, a powerful, wealthy landowner marrying a woman listed simply as the enslaved cook, but the shadow it casts. This certificate is the sole surviving evidence of a partnership that coincided with the disappearance and death of 13 people. Official reports from the time, neatly filed away and long forgotten, attributed these deaths to a sudden, virulent outbreak of swamp fever. A convenient lie that allowed the truth to be buried alongside the victims. But the whispers in the bayous and the hushed gossip in New Orleans society told a much darker story, a story of greed, murder, and a man who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. This frail piece of paper is the first clue that unravels a cold case nearly a century and a half old. Jeremiah Aldrich's story did not begin in the grand, opulent streets of New Orleans, but in the unforgiving red clay of rural Kentucky. He was the son of a failed farmer, a man who worked himself to an early grave trying to coax a living from the barren land. Jeremiah grew up watching his family's constant struggle against poverty and futility. He learned early on that honest labor offered no guarantees, and that the world was an unfair place where the strong devoured the weak. This profound sense of injustice, of being on the losing side of a rigged game, festered within him, hardening his heart and replacing any sense of morality with a cold, ruthless ambition. He fled the dust and desperation of his past, arriving in New Orleans in the year 1845, a gaunt, angry young man with nothing but a frayed set of clothes and a fire in his belly. The city hit him like a shock. The air was thick with the smells of salt, molasses, and human desperation. He saw carriages pulled by gleaming horses, carrying men in fine silk coats and women adorned with jewels. He watched as fortunes were made and lost in a single handshake. This wasn't the world he knew, where a man's worth was measured by the calluses on his hands. Here, it was measured by the weight of his wallet, and Jeremiah vowed he would have more than anyone else. He was a chameleon, a predator with no fixed identity. He observed, he listened, and he learned how to navigate this new landscape. He took on odd jobs, using his cunning to get ahead of others, betraying temporary allies for a single dollar or a small lead. For Jeremiah, every interaction was a transaction, every person a means to an end. His lack of a family name or reputation was not a hindrance, it was a weapon. He had no one to disappoint, no legacy to protect, and no conscience to hold him back. The very poverty that had haunted his youth became the fuel for his merciless climb. He saw the world not as a place of people, but as a ladder, and he would climb it, stepping on anyone who got in his way. He knew that the only way to escape the ghosts of his past was to become a monster in the present. Jeremiah's ruthless ambition quickly found its home in the seedy underbelly of New Orleans. He was introduced to two men who would become his stepping stones, Devo, a boisterous, cigar-chomping showman who reveled in their illicit wealth, and Rochelle, a shrewd, wary man with a cynical glare and a genius for logistics. Together, they ran the Delta Trading Company, a clandestine and highly profitable operation that trafficked illegally enslaved people through the treacherous bayous of Louisiana. Their business was built on human suffering, and Jeremiah proved to be its most efficient architect. He meticulously planned routes, manipulated ledgers to deceive authorities, and found new, more brutal ways to maximize their cargo. While Devo spent their money lavishly on gambling and fine wines, and Rochelle worried about the ever-present threat of the law, Jeremiah stayed sober and focused, his mind a cold calculator of risk and reward. The profits swelled beyond their wildest dreams. They were sitting on a fortune, but with the money came a gnawing sense of paranoia. Jeremiah began to see his partners not as allies, but as liabilities. Every time Devo bragged about their exploits in a smoky backroom, Jeremiah saw a noose tightening around his neck. Every time Rochelle expressed a desire to retire and disappear, Jeremiah saw a threat to his absolute control. He began to believe that their partnership was a temporary arrangement, a stepping stone to something greater. The wealth they had accumulated was tainted, a constant reminder of their shared secrets. He felt that the only way to truly be free, to secure a future where his past could never be used against him, was to eliminate the very men who shared his crimes. He spent sleepless nights plotting, devising scenarios, and deciding on a course of action that was as cruel as it was final. He wasn't just a partner anymore, he was a silent judge and jury, and he had already decided on the sentence. His greed had transformed into a desire for absolute power, and absolute power, he knew, required a clean slate. The end came for Devo and Rochelle on a night of pouring rain, in a secluded, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of New Orleans. The corrugated metal roof groaned under the weight of the downpour, and the only light came from a single, sputtering lantern that cast long, dancing shadows. Jeremiah had lured them there under the pretense of a final, magnificent deal that would make them untouchable. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood, rust, and the metallic tang of unspoken tension. Jeremiah poured them a rare whiskey, his hand steady as he offered a toast. "To our final and most profitable venture," he said, his voice calm, betraying nothing. The drinks were laced with a deadly poison, and as Devo and Rochelle took a greedy sip, their faces contorted in a horrifying mask of shock and then agony. Jeremiah watched them for a moment, his eyes cold and devoid of emotion. But he had underestimated Rochelle's resilience. As Devo collapsed, choking on his own blood, Rochelle, with a guttural roar, lunged at Jeremiah. The two men crashed into a pile of wooden crates. It wasn't a fight for victory, but a desperate, brutal struggle for survival. Jeremiah, prepared for this, pulled a hidden knife and plunged it into Rochelle, again and again. With his last, gasping breath, Rochelle stared into Jeremiah's triumphant eyes, a mixture of rage and despair on his face. "You think you've won?" he choked out, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "My son, he will find out. He will know what you did. And he will come for you. A man like you, you cannot escape your blood." Jeremiah ignored him, delivering one final, vicious blow. He then set to work, meticulously staging the scene to look like a drunken fight had broken out between the two men over their shared spoils. He wiped the blood from his hands, pocketed the knife, and slipped out into the drenching rain. He was a ghost now, a legend of two greedy partners who had destroyed each other. He believed Rochelle's dying curse was a meaningless threat, but it was, in fact, the first seed of his long and terrible downfall. In the wake of the brutal murders, Jeremiah moved with the cold efficiency of a seasoned criminal. He had the immense fortune from the Delta Trading Company, and he used every last bit of it to bury his past. He bribed the local police captain, a corpulent man with a taste for fine whiskey and loose women, to close the case and write it off as a tragic but all too common drunken dispute. He paid off the few witnesses who had seen him in the vicinity of the warehouse, silencing them with a combination of fear and money. He personally scoured the city, visiting every safe house and lockbox, destroying every ledger, every contract, and every scrap of paper that could link him to his former partners and the illegal trade. He even bribed a corrupt judge to sign off on a falsified death certificate. Jeremiah Aldrich was no longer the ruthless criminal, he was a man reborn, ready to take his place among the elite. With his slate wiped clean, he purchased a sprawling, opulent plantation in the heart of Louisiana, a place of stunning beauty that would become the living testament to his supposed respectability. He renamed it, the Aldrich Estate, and quickly became known for his generosity to the local church and his firm but fair hand with his property. But there was one final, chilling act of cruelty he had yet to commit. As part of a cruel, drunken wager with his new peers, he decided to marry Celeste, the enslaved cook on his estate. He saw it as the ultimate symbol of his power, the ability to take a person who was his property and make her his wife, a silent trophy to his victory. He believed he was elevating her, but in reality, he was binding her to his dark secret. "You are an Aldrich now, Celeste," he told her with a chilling smile, believing he had turned her into a silent, living possession. He saw this as his final, most magnificent triumph, but he was tragically mistaken. By making her his wife, he had not only made her a witness to his lies but had also sealed his own fate, creating the first crack in his perfect facade. While Jeremiah Aldrich was living a life of luxury and deceit in New Orleans, two young boys were growing into men far across the sea in Europe. Philippe Deveau and Henri Rochelle, the orphaned sons of Jeremiah's victims, were raised on a lie, that their fathers had died in a tragic business dispute. But as they came of age, they began to question the vague stories and the strange, quiet sorrow of their mothers. They dug into old family records, traveled to dusty archives, and eventually, their persistent curiosity led them to a hidden ledger, a sealed letter, and a handful of forgotten witnesses. The truth was far more monstrous than they could have imagined. They learned that their fathers had not died in an accident, but had been brutally murdered by a man named Jeremiah Aldrich, a man who now lived a life of false respectability. But instead of rushing for a quick revenge, Philippe and Henri chose patience. For over a decade, they quietly built their own vast fortunes, their own powerful networks, and their own cruel plan. They were driven not by a quick, emotional act of revenge, but by a deep-seated, methodical desire for justice that would be far worse than death. They knew that a bullet or a knife would be a mercy for a man like Jeremiah. They wanted to strip him of everything he had stolen, his reputation, his fortune, and his peace of mind. Henri, the quiet, methodical one, studied his father's old ledgers, learning the intricacies of Jeremiah's past. Philippe, the charismatic and charming one, used his charm to build a network of allies. They were the ghosts of Jeremiah's past, and they were finally ready to haunt him. As Henri said, his voice cold and unwavering, "My father said you cannot escape your blood. He was talking about me. And now, we are the blood, and we are coming for him." Jeremiah Aldrich, now an older, corpulent man in his twilight years, sat on the porch of his magnificent estate, looking out over the fields he had purchased with blood money. He was a living legend, a self-made man who had outsmarted his enemies and built an empire from nothing. He believed his past was buried so deeply that even God couldn't find it. He had a beautiful home, a quiet wife, and the respect of his community. He was untouchable. But on that quiet afternoon, a letter arrived. It was a single, unmarked envelope with an elegant seal. The moment he held it, a deep, unsettling feeling of dread came over him. As he opened it, a look of pure, gut-wrenching panic crossed his face. The note inside held a single, chilling sentence: "The ghosts of betrayal are not dead. They are just beginning their work." He looked around in a paranoid frenzy, but saw nothing. Yet in the coming weeks, small things began to happen. A crucial ledger from a hidden vault was discovered to be missing. A key witness from his past, an old man he had bribed years ago, was found dead in a suspicious fire, but not before giving a coded confession to a local priest. A business deal he had been working on for months suddenly fell through for no reason. Jeremiah's perfect life began to unravel, thread by thread, and he felt a cold hand gripping his heart. In the shadows of the old oak trees, hidden from his view, Philippe and Henri watched him, their faces filled with cold, patient fury. They were preparing a revenge so meticulously planned, so exquisitely cruel, that Jeremiah would wish for the swift, clean mercy of the grave. He had spent his life escaping his past, but he was about to find out that you can never truly outrun your own demons.